Welcome to today's podcast. What role do sexual fantasies play in your relationship? Should you share them with your partner, or does shame hold you back? Tune in to explore how fantasy can impact intimacy and connection. What's the role of fantasy in sex? Fantasy, a concept deeply rooted in the human psyche, holds a significant impact on both our minds and bodies. Studies indicate that an overwhelming majority of individuals engage in fantasy, with approximately 90% of women and nearly 100% of men indulging in such mental escapades. Psychologically, fantasy acts as a bridge. It connects the untamed, primal urges within us to the well-mannered and socialized parts of our identity. This bridge allows our inner child, the parts of us that desire to play, love, rebel, or even experience hurt without consequence, to safely reside in harmony with our moral and social expectations. From a physiological perspective, the process of fantasizing triggers tangible responses in the body. As our brains conjure these vivid dreams, our bodies can respond accordingly. This propensity for fantasy might be linked to levels of testosterone, perhaps accounting for observed differences between genders. However, it's essential not to overgeneralize this gender disparity. Under certain conditions such as stress, some men may scarcely fantasize, while some women can achieve orgasm solely through the power of fantasy. Dispelling common myths about fantasy is crucial. It isn't merely a refuge for the undersexed or those lacking in sexual activity. In fact, research shows that the more arousable and sexually experienced individuals are, the more they tend to engage in fantasies. While such vivid daydreams can occasionally be unnerving, they are predominantly harmless and not precursors to real-life actions. Our nighttime dreams, which are often more unsettling due to their seemingly uncontrolled nature, share this same safety net. Fantasies give us an opportunity to direct our own mental movies, casting ourselves in exhilarating and often unattainable scenarios. Whether it's being adored, dominated, engaging with someone off-limits, or performing in daring settings, from the bustling city streets to the lofty heights of the Empire State Building, these dreams thrive on their improbability and the comfort that nothing within them will come to pass. For those struggling to initiate a fantasy, creativity isn't a prerequisite. These mental narratives often stem from personal experiences or favored erotica. Reimagining and tweaking these memories can serve as a potent starting point. Women might weave intricate stories, while men might envision isolated scenes with varying partners. The objective is to let the mental film unfurl without hesitation, relishing the control we wield over our fantasy realm. In terms of sharing these fantasies with partners, it's not obligatory. However, if silence is born from guilt, confiding in a therapist might be beneficial. Conversely, if a partner's fantasy is deeply unsettling, it should be addressed and adjusted through open dialogue, ensuring neither party feels pressured to embrace something they despise. Uninhibited partners who freely share their fantasies with each other often experience a deeper level of intimacy and communication. For those more reserved, mutual storytelling or setting creative pre-lovemaking tasks can foster this shared fantasy space. Action isn't always the next step after fantasizing, though it might seem tempting. Crossing the bridge from fantasy to reality demands caution. The allure of certain fantasies lies in their unattainable nature, and pursuing them in reality may lead to undesired consequences. For instance, fantasies involving additional participants should be navigated carefully. Instead of actually inviting others into your intimate space, envisioning that your partner's touch is someone else's can preserve the fantasy without bringing complex dynamics into reality. Should you share your fantasies with your partner? He continued the conversation, asking if I had any fantasies. I replied, "Oh, not really. I'm happy with what we're doing," I blurted out. The dialogue came to an abrupt halt, but my thoughts started racing. It struck me as odd that Xander might not have any fantasies. Was he genuinely content with repeating the same activities? I had been counting on him to bring some inspiration to our relationship. Then I began to question myself, did I have any fantasies? There were a few things I had considered trying, but pondering over Xander's satisfaction with our current state made me hesitant to bring them up. I feared being judged or perceived as strange for my interests. Life seemed destined to remain monotonous until a sudden burst of inspiration hit me a few weeks later. I reflected, this is the guy who put his finger in my butt. He must be open to exploring other things. It dawned on me that perhaps the term fantasy was too strong. I wouldn't categorize my curiosities as full-fledged fantasies either. With this in mind, I asked Xander a few days later, "What's one thing you're curious about trying in the bedroom with me?" That question finally elicited a response. Years of conversations about the word fantasy with thousands of people have led me to understand that we might be asking the wrong question. For example, when I asked my Instagram audience whether they had any fantasies, 70% responded no. The problem is that many perceive the term fantasy to mean an intricate and detailed scenario involving role-playing and story arcs that you think of constantly and reach orgasm just by imagining. Consider the following example. Okay, so we're in 18th century England. I'm a duchess, and you're my husband's attractive younger butler. He travels to collect taxes from the townspeople. Suddenly a massive storm hits, and I'm terrified of the lightning and thunder. If specific scenarios like 18th century thunderstorms, or anything just as unique are your thing, that's fantastic. I'm genuinely happy for you. However, if the concept of fantasy doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't mean you lack interests or curiosities altogether. Often people conflate the word fantasy with something that has to be grandiose and meticulously thought out. However, having curiosities or interests doesn't necessitate labeling them as fantasies. Understanding this might prove to be more useful when exploring new dimensions in your personal relationships. Can fantasy help overcome intimacy issues? Until recently, sexual fantasy has often been viewed with skepticism and negativity. Historically, Christianity has considered it sinful, and modern psychology at one time labeled it a symptom of dissatisfaction, immaturity, or perversion. This view persists to some extent today, with many people believing that sexual fantasies are simply a compensation for unfulfilled desires and opportunities, often attributed to personal failings such as timidity, arrested development, or physical appearance issues. For instance, some individuals think that if a partner were genuinely attracted to them, they wouldn't need to look at explicit images or entertain fantasies involving others. Take the example of a wife who feels that if her husband were truly attracted to her, he wouldn't need to look at pictures of women with larger breasts. Another client feels a sense of betrayal when fantasizing about other men, even though she has a devoted boyfriend. These individuals equate sexual fantasies with a desire for those fantasies to become reality, creating a sense of guilt and inadequacy. I too once shared this narrow perspective, viewing fantasy as merely a substitute for lack of sexual satisfaction. I used to consider fantasies as signs of neurosis or immaturity, or as romantic notions that detracted from appreciating one's real partner and potentially harmed real-life relationships. This perspective kept me from exploring the intricate interplay between the imaginary and the real aspects of human sexuality. However, my curiosity led me to ask my patients about their fantasies, even though initially I didn't know how to interpret this information. It was akin to watching a superb Russian film without understanding the subtitles. I could see the aesthetic value but missed the deeper meaning. Over time, though, the understanding within the field of psychology has evolved. Today, fantasy is recognized as a crucial aspect of healthy adult sexuality. This shift from viewing fantasies as secret compulsions or perversions to recognizing them as a vital part of a well-rounded sexual life has been influenced by the collective efforts of various philosophers and clinicians. Thinkers such as Michel Foucault, Georges Bataille, Ethel Spector Person, Robert Stoller, Jack Morin, Michael Bader, and many others have significantly contributed to our understanding of the erotic imagination's depth and richness. Their work has reshaped our view of what fantasy is and what it can accomplish. In my own practice, I have come to appreciate sexual fantasy as a valuable and imaginative resource, beneficially impacting both individuals and couples. The ability to explore boundless possibilities in our imagination is a true testament to our individual freedom and creativity. Fantasies can transcend the constraints of our daily reality, offering a much-needed escape that can reinvigorate sexual desire within relationships. In essence, fantasy adds a layer of excitement and imagination to love and tenderness. Beyond sexual aspects, fantasies possess almost magical qualities capable of healing and renewal. They can restore what has been physically lost, such as imagining breasts post-mastectomy or walking after a crippling accident. They can reverse time, allowing us to feel youthful and embody traits we may no longer possess or never did, like flawlessness, strength, and beauty. Fantasies can also revive memories of a beloved who has passed away or reawaken passions with a current partner that have since dwindled. Through fantasy, we can repair, compensate, and transform our realities, even momentarily rising above the all-too-real limitations of life and death. The more I delve into the subject, the more I appreciate the cunning nature of fantasy. It is a combination of our unique personal histories and the broader strokes of collective imagination. Different cultures provide cues and boundaries about what is considered sexually appealing and what is forbidden, with figures like American Idol contestants or notorious individuals like Monica Lewinsky serving as cultural touchstones. Fantasies bridge the gap between what is possible and what is permitted. They are the alchemy that transforms a mixture of psychic elements into the pure gold of erotic arousal. In my work with couples, sexual fantasies serve as a rich source of insight into individual internal lives and relationship dynamics. Fantasies are ingenious ways our creative minds navigate and resolve various conflicts around desire and intimacy. Psychoanalyst Michael Bader, in his incisive book Arousal, discusses how the erotic mind creates a psychological safe space where we can undo the inhibitions and fears that plague us. Within the sanctuary of our erotic minds, fantasies enable us to bypass restrictions imposed by conscience, culture, and self-image. For those who feel insecure and unattractive, fantasies can make them feel irresistible. If one anticipates a partner being emotionally distant or withholding, fantasies can transform them into someone insatiably desiring. Individuals who fear their own aggression can feel powerful in their fantasies without the fear of harming others. For those unsure about asking for what they want, their erotic imaginations can create scenarios where their needs are understood even before they themselves recognize them. If societal or personal morals dictate that sex is undesirable, fantasies allow for indulgence without responsibility. It's framed as the desire of the other, not oneself. Fantasy, therefore, becomes a space where fears are turned into empowerment. It transforms inhibitory emotions such as shame into curiosity, timidity into assertiveness, and helplessness into a sense of sovereignty. This transformation through fantasy provides individuals with a mental and emotional release, demonstrating the profound psychological force and therapeutic potential of the erotic imagination. Is shame a barrier to sharing fantasies? A fantasy serves as an intricate map of our desires, aspirations for mastery, means of escape, and elements of obscuration. It represents the navigational route we've architected to maneuver through the reefs and shoals of anxiety, guilt, and inhibition. This creation is fundamentally a work of consciousness that emerges as a reaction to unconscious pressures. What's truly captivating about fantasies is not solely their bizarre nature, but also how they are comprehensible, providing coherent and consistent portraits of the personality and unconscious mind of the individual who concocts them. Despite an individual possibly perceiving his fantasy as a random whim of the moment, it is anything but. The symbolic paradoxes and irrational elements of our erotic imagination offer the most enthralling and illuminating glimpses into the deepest corners of our psyche. Fantasies articulate truths about our inner selves that are often difficult to access through other means. They present us in our most exposed form, and through their mysterious mechanisms, express our deepest desires and wishes. Nonetheless, when it comes to articulating these internal musings, most of us remain remarkably reticent, frequently even more so with our intimate partners. While contemporary culture places significant emphasis on intimacy characterized by the disclosure of uncomfortable personal truths, erotic silence persists as the norm. Although we might feel comfortable discussing our actions, few of us are eager to divulge our thoughts during these actions. This reluctance to share originates primarily from simple embarrassment. From a very young age, most of us were instructed to keep our thoughts private and to refrain from exploring our bodies. For some, this message was imparted even more strictly, transforming innocent curiosity into enduring shame. Educated into silence, bearing the legacy of a profound distrust of sexuality, it is hardly surprising that we feel discomfort at the idea of disclosing our deepest thoughts. By opening ourselves up to another person, we risk being ridiculed and judged. My patient Zoya encapsulated this sentiment perfectly. The way I grew up, there was no liking sex, let alone talking about it. People who had sex because they liked it were considered sluts and perverts who would go blind and grow hair on their palms. You bet I kept my mouth shut. This sentiment is shared widely. If we're not talking about our sexual fantasies, it's likely that no one else is either. Many of us experience our sexual fantasies in solitude, despite the omnipresence of sex in public discourse. In the absence of knowing what others are thinking and doing, we lack a benchmark to compare our experiences, leaving us without a way to determine what is considered normal. Consequently, we live in fear of being perceived as different, and therefore deviant. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. Follow us for more podcasts like this, and explore fresh, exciting topics every day. With over 1,000 free podcasts on our app, there's always something new to discover. Just grab the link in our About Us section. Don't forget to rate our channel and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.